Hello, hello, hello. It's 5 o'clock on the East Coast. Welcome to today's call on 2025 consulting salaries. You are listening to the biggest and the best consulting podcast in the world. So, if you're joining us live on YouTube, on LinkedIn, here on the Management Consulted platform, you made a fantastic choice. You're going to be with us here for the next hour, and we're going to be breaking down not just what you can expect to earn in consulting, which sure is interesting, but more importantly, how that should affect your recruiting strategy and how, if you're a consulting firm, you should be thinking about your talent strategy as a result of what's happening in the overall market. So today is focused on how you can apply the information that we're going to be sharing with you today. I'm joined by our CEO, Jenny Ray. Jenny Ray, do you want to say hey to the folks?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Ray LaRue. I'm really passionate about salary transparency and really proud of the fact that this is our 18th year with the salary report. We have been advocating for and advancing salary transparency. And initially, we got a lot of pushback from firms, although job seekers have always loved it. And what we actually have found is that the more salary transparency we offer, the more firms compete for aligned talent, not just for a general pool of talent, but for talent that really makes sense for them. And the more leverage firms have for talent not to negotiate. Actually, there was a lot more negotiation in consulting 18 years ago when we began this. And now it's kind of like, look, we published it in the beginning. We're telling you what it is now. We think it's incredibly fair. In fact, even on the generous side, we're going to ask you to work super hard, but we're going to give you a lot in exchange. And just watching that alignment happen in the industry is really a part of what we're excited about and why we love what we do. Just a quick shout out of thank you. This report comes directly from firms and from offer letters from candidates. And we had so many people contribute to this year's production. So Naman's going to talk just a little bit about all the firms and everybody that's involved. But to anyone who's on the call today who was a part of that, thank you. This is a pay it forward system. We have created the salary report for 18 years completely for free to all of our readers and to all of the firms that participate. So for everyone who's here today, thank you for that. If you're here with a firm or if you're listening with a firm and you have not put your salary information into the salary report, we do a batch update approximately 3 weeks in to the salary report publication. So please submit your information to us directly. Back to you, Naman.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jenny Ray. Our producer, Japheth, is on the line as well. None of this happens without Japheth, so shout out to Japheth. Japheth, I know you've got a poll for the folks here who are live on our platform. If you want to pop that up, it'd be great for us to know who's joining us today live so that we can speak to your specific reality and concerns. And so if you're a job seeker, if you're in recruiting, if you're a leader at a consulting firm, if you represent a university, let us know through the poll. Japheth will shut that down in about 5 more seconds, and then that'll give us a good sense of who's on the call. And while you're finishing up that poll, I'm just going to introduce Management Consulted to you if this salary report is really your first exposure to who we are and what we do. We've been around since 2008. Jenny Ray mentioned this is our 18th year doing the salary report, making it available completely for free. And we work with over 50 consulting firms, 120 universities, and over 15,000 candidates. And so if you're a consulting firm and you're on this call today, there are multiple ways that we can help serve you. We work on custom benchmarking reports as you're updating your compensation strategy. We do trusted advisor training to impart consulting skills and executive communication skills to your teams. And we connect you with the amazing talent inside of our 4 million member strong community. And so you can scan the QR code and learn more about how we serve our firms. One of our VPs, Eden Simon, is on the call as well. I'm going to let her talk to you about how we serve universities and job seekers.
Hey, thanks, Naman. Super happy to be on the call. Hello, everyone. So I serve our universities and our job seekers in a very special way, and I just want to tell you what we do. So we have over 120 university partners, like Naman just mentioned, where we train on executive skills, MBA skills, case interview training, case competition training, and in-house case competitions, along with our digital platform. And so we have a vast amount of resources that really is that A to Z recruitment and skills support that you really could be needing for your students right now. So if you're interested, scan the QR code. I'd love for you to get in touch with me, or you can DM me on the Zoom. For our individual candidates who are our job seekers, we also support you A to Z in a different capacity. We provide coaching, we provide curriculum, we provide benchmarks so you can be tracking your progress and making sure that you're on the right track when you're prepping for recruitment. And if you are at all interested in finding out how we might support you in that aspect, or if you're wanting to jump on a pro bono consulting project, we actually have one kicking off on Saturday, and we have a couple seats left for that. If you want to know more about that, scan the QR code or follow the links in the chat that Japheth's going to drop, and I'd love to chat with you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Eden. Let's go ahead and dive right in. The theme of today's call is that consulting is a window into the soul of the broader economy. And so what we're not going to do today is just walk you through how much McKinsey, Bain, and BCG pay, say, here's the numbers, have fun. We will walk through the numbers, but we're going to talk about the broader implications of consulting firms' compensation strategy and how that affects your job search and how that affects how much you should be paying your people if you're running a consulting firm or another business. Here's how we're going to get there. So first, we're going to talk about the big picture salary trends that are taking place in the industry and the key drivers underpinning that trend. We're then going to go into talking about what this means both for candidates and for firms. Then we'll walk through some of the specific numbers, and then we'll end with a little bit of Q&A and an overview of the updated 2025 hiring cycle. So 43% of you on this call said, hey, I'm here because I'm a job seeker. And so if you're a job seeker, it would behoove you to know when you should apply and when your recruiting season is happening. And so stick around. We'll walk you through that at the end of the call today. So what the heck is happening with consulting compensation in 2025? Okay, here's what happened, right? Consulting starting salaries froze for offers that had start dates in 2025, even as demand for consulting services rose. And if you read our consulting report last year, and if you were on this call last year, we predicted this. We said that demand for services would rise, but compensation would not keep up with that demand. And there are three reasons why that ended up being true. Number one, there's a greater supply of talent in the marketplace than there is demand for it. So a loosening labor market ensured that there were many more of you who wanted consulting jobs than there were job openings, i.e., this is a competitive market. It remains so. This upcoming recruiting cycle, kind of moving into 2026, from what I'm seeing so far, is going to be the most competitive recruiting cycle we've seen since we've been around, and we've been around for almost 20 years. Number two, you saw consulting firms start to really roll out artificial intelligence on their project teams. And so this is what AI enablement is enabling consulting firms to do. It's allowing them to get more output from the same or even less headcount. So you are able to get more output from the same size project team, or you are maybe even able to reduce the size of your project team, have AI take the place of an analyst and get the same or more output. And so what does this do? This reduces demand for new hiring. And then third, because of how loose the labor market was, you saw reduced attrition inside of consulting as well, right? Fewer consultants left the industry last year. That led to less new hiring, right? That lower demand leads to depressed starting salaries. So when you kind of look beneath the surface, there are really reasonable explanations for why starting salaries froze. Even though this is pretty unprecedented, this is the first 2-year stretch in 15 years where we haven't seen starting base salaries rise. And so if you're entering the industry this year, your purchasing power is really decreased over folks who entered 2 years ago when you consider the cumulative effects of the inflation that we've seen here in the US and abroad. Jenny Ray, anything else you want to add to what has happened before we start to look forward?
Well, I just want to highlight that it sounds a little doomsday. You might wonder, is consulting at the end of its life cycle? And one of the things that's important to point out in context of all of this is just two things. I just want to underpin what Naman said. Number one, consulting revenues rose last year as they have risen every single year since we have been tracking them. So every consulting sector, we're seeing significant growth or moderate growth in. And so this is not representative of the end of the consulting life cycle as some media outlets would like to paint it. That's not what is happening here. So if you do decide to enter the industry, there is significant upside on the firms, and they're thinking about what they're investing in and the transformation that they're doing. The second thing is that I would argue that even that in this loosening labor market, consulting firms, and Naman's going to talk about this more tactically, have really doubled down on investing outside of pure comp. So while you've seen comp freeze, you've seen an adjustment in some of the alignment pieces. For example, the variable comp portions. You've seen culture changes inside the firms. You've seen firms really get active about competing, actually not as much to get new talent, which they're able to get pretty readily, but really to retain the talent that they've had. And so all of those really speak to a broader shift that's happening in the market, but it is not because of a threat to the industry. It's because of natural transformation that's taking place because of changes that we're seeing consulting firms recommend to others. They're doing them unto themselves.
One of the things that we'll do here as we move throughout the call is we'll make a download link available for the full report. One of the things that we write inside the full report is when you look under the surface, the patient is much healthier than it seems on the surface. And so all of this is actually good news for consulting firms because they were able to expand margins last year. They were able to hold the line on compensation as they saw their demand increase. And so partners at consulting firms are in a much happier place this year than they were last year and than they were 2 years ago because of some of these strategic talent moves that they've made and because of the emphasis that they've placed on implementing AI inside of their project teams. So if that's what's happened so far, what does this mean for you, the job seeker? And what does this mean for the industry as a whole? So what Jenny Ray and I are going to do is we're going to break down 5 trends that we see taking place inside the industry over the next 12 months. Number one, compensation data gives us a clue as to who the economic winners and losers are. And early insight into this phenomenon gives candidates a big competitive advantage, can give investors a big competitive advantage, can give business owners a big competitive advantage, no matter who you are, which seat you sit in, knowing who's going to win and who's going to lose, or at least having a better idea of that in January, that's helpful for you. Second, we're going to talk about what Jenny Ray already mentioned, how consulting firms are using variable comp as a point of differentiation to control their fixed costs. Third, we're going to talk about how perceptions of the value of an MBA are all over the place inside the industry. You have some firms that value an MBA really highly and others who really don't value an MBA much more than an undergraduate or a specialty master's degree. We're going to talk about why that is and how for you, those of you who are considering an MBA should think about the types of firms that you pursue. Fourth, one of the implications of that, or the second order implications of that, is that less MBA hiring at some firms opens up new opportunities for top candidates. And it also opens up opportunities for firms that maybe wouldn't have had a shot at top MBA talent in the past. And so we'll talk about that. And then fifth, we'll talk about how companies across sectors are seeing the value in bringing strategy in-house. And so you're seeing increasing demand for services from the management consulting industry, as you're also seeing more and more of the Fortune 500 bring strategy in-house as well. So this is really shifting the mix in terms of the type of work that consulting firms are executing on behalf of their clients. Here's trend number one. Demand for consulting services is robust. It's higher now than it was last year, but it's not evenly distributed. And I think that's a key point for career services folks to know, for job seekers to know, and for everybody on this call to know. So, Jenny Ray, one of the things that I know you've been talking about a lot lately is the convergence of business cycles. Can you walk us through this phenomenon, and then we'll talk about some of the second order effects of that?
One of the favorite things that we get to do here are host panels for firms. We always rotate many firms in and off of our panels this year. And so in November, we held a State of the Consulting Industry panel. And a number of the practice leaders or business leaders across some major consulting firms were talking about how we used to see this cyclical 18-month to 3-year period where we would have either companies focus on cost cutting or revenue generation that would kind of shift from one to the other. And they were just talking about this. And then we kind of did some deep digging and found that this is very true across organizations. Companies are doing both cost cutting and revenue growth work at the same time right now. And so in fact, they're cost cutting to grow revenue, which is rare. We haven't often seen that before. Usually we've seen invest cash in revenue. We've seen cut back in order to conserve cash. Now we're seeing cut release immediate cash so that we can invest in revenue growth. And that just speaks to some of the transformation that's happening with the advance of technology, certain geopolitical changes that is affecting that as well. But this business convergence of do we grow or do we shrink? The answer is yes. And businesses that are able to successfully serve their clients, actually not just in one of those, but in both, are really winning in this market.
And so one of the things that this convergence of business cycles is doing is spurring this demand for increased consulting services. When you have an increased demand, the utilization of your current consultants increases. So last year we saw delayed start dates across many of the firms, right? And that was because current consultants were on the beach. They weren't being staffed on as many projects or as consistently as they needed to be for the firms to make a return on the investment they'd already made in that existing talent. As you see that utilization increase of current consultants, you're going to see that they need newer and more staffing to keep up with demand. You're also going to see attrition increase because the more that utilization increases, the more that some consultants risk burnout, the more that people are spurred to leave because they're working longer days and longer weeks. And so then that feeds the hiring cycle. Now, specifically where we're seeing demand for consulting services and where we expect to see a requisite demand for new talent is in these three functions and sectors. Number one, supply chain. There's a lot of talk right now, both in the US and globally, about tariffs. And there are a lot of companies that are nearshoring supply chains, onshoring supply chains, looking to mitigate risk in that area. And you are seeing a lot of consulting firms, a lot, especially in the big four, work with clients now on protecting and rerouting their supply chains in advance of any tariff activity that could be coming from this administration or from countries around the world. So supply chain's a hot sector and a hot practice area in consulting this year. Number two is healthcare. Here in the US, healthcare makes up 1/6 of the US economy. It's a massive part of our GDP. It's ripe for disruption. And you're seeing a lot of digitization. You're seeing a lot of kind of operations projects in healthcare focused on throughput at hospitals, for example, happening this year. A lot of consolidation in the sector. There's a lot of work right now in healthcare, and consulting firms are at the forefront of it. Third is cloud services, and that includes artificial intelligence and some of the knock-on effects of AI implementation in the broader economy. And so if you are a candidate looking to maximize your chances of breaking into consulting this year, supply chain practices, healthcare practices, cloud services practices, right, especially at places like Accenture, are hiring. And so if you are a strategic candidate, which I would argue all of you are because you're on the call today, then you're going to pay attention to where the demand is and you're going to pay attention to where the hiring is. And so that's one of the reasons that we're holding this call, why you're here, is so that you know where to target as you ramp up your job search. Trend number two.
Can I just add one little asterisk to
Yep.
that strategy too? Look, 10 years ago, we used to say not all consulting is created equal, land where you want to end up. And that was our best practice advice. Right now, the general word on the street is that actually advanced hiring, that hiring with experience and specifically with consulting experience is some of the hot pocket area and also some of the hardest to fill roles. So as we're meeting with consulting firms, they're like, gosh, if somebody had 1 or 2 years of experience, that we would love that. They have plenty of recent grads. And so our recommendation is that from a comp perspective, you don't actually have to worry inside consulting because, again, there's salary transparency. When you're entering into a role, you're going to get paid that role amount, and you're going to jump if you're going to jump based on experience. But getting experience and working up that experience curve can be a significant advantage. So that is a shift that we've seen, and I just wanted to make sure we made note of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I think one of the things we're going to talk about here as we move throughout the call today is the increasing opportunity at some boutique firms, right? And the value proposition that they can provide is giving you that year or two of experience, getting your foot in the door. Let's move back to trend number two here, which is around variable compensation. So firms are adjusting variable compensation going both ways. Some are increasing the max variable compensation that you can earn. Some are decreasing the max variable compensation you can earn. And I think there's really two major implications of this. Number one, kind of your target firms either increasing or decreasing the max variable comp that they offer gives you a really good insight into the type of culture that you're joining. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then number two, some of this movement honestly is just window dressing because nothing has really changed. Only 5 to 10% of consultants at like the average firm will earn the max compensation that they are entitled to in any given year. And so you have a lot of firms that are raising their variable compensation caps while leaving base salaries the same. So the total offer letter looks bigger and you're happy, right? And the firms are able to say, hey, like we're raising compensation, right? They know that 90% of their incoming cohort isn't going to hit that max number anyways. And so as you're comparing offers, as you're comparing firms, one of the things that we often advise our clients to do is yes, take variable compensation into account, but really focus on base salary and focus on signing bonus in the first year if you want to know how much you'll actually take home. And if it was up to me, if everything else was equal, I'd take an offer with a higher base salary over a higher signing bonus, even if the total was the same, because my raises in years 2, 3, and 4 will be based on my base salary, not based on total compensation. And so really pay attention to base salary and don't assume that you're ever going to earn 100% of the variable comp that's available to you. I would cut that max number in half and have that be a reasonable expectation of how much I could expect to take home in any given year. Now, one of the things that Jenny Ray mentioned earlier, and Jenny Ray, I'll let you speak to this since you mentioned it, is that some firms are going the other way. They're reducing max variable compensation and they're introducing or enhancing non-financial compensation. So can you talk to us a little bit about what non-financial compensation looks like?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, non-financial compensation can include things like days off. It can include welfare or healthcare bonuses, right? Where it's like you get a massage a month. It's bringing additional training into the office. It's adding career development training or offsite career development experiences. It's bringing the organization together, post-COVID. This was kind of a question. We're back now. Portugal is in play, right? The Cayman Islands, they're in play. Like, let's go, let's be together. Firms are spending money on these things, and they're really like anchoring people into these kinds of experiences that are both for your personal benefit, but also for connectivity inside the firm. Naman, if you want me to go a little deeper, I can, but I think it also might be helpful to tease out the difference between variable comp that is individual and variable comp that is tied to firm performance. So I don't want to jump the gun if you're going to highlight that somewhere else, but I think it's really important to recognize this, especially if you're here from a firm, because it's not just diagnosing as a job seeker what you're going to get paid, but also like why are firms thinking about this strategically? So I'll just seed that with one thing that came from a call that we had with a partner last year. They said, never again do we want to delay start dates. So one of the ways that you do that is a business that is a very fixed cost heavy business. These organizations are very, very, salary oriented, is that you try to shift some of the pay to be more variable so that you're able to flex real time pay, not just in the longer term. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that now, or do you want to attack that later?
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny Ray. I'm seeing some firms that are so let me just break down what variable compensation can look like. So you have performance bonuses, which are really kind of your individual variable compensation, and then you have some firms that offer profit sharing, which is company-wide performance. And so for the firms that lean on the profit sharing side, the entire firm has to hit its targets for the year, and then a cut of the incremental profit is split amongst everybody in the firm, depending on what level you're at. And so your profit share slice is much smaller usually than what your individual performance bonus allotment would be at most firms. And so thinking through as your and I'll talk about the candidate side first. As you're a candidate, okay, what does this variable compensation actually look like? Is it based on firm performance or is it based on individual performance? For me personally, I'm someone who's motivated actually more by my own individual performance than by a 4,000 person firm meeting goals collectively. And so as I was, if I was examining offers today and I had two on the table, I would want to bet on myself more. And I'd want to go with an offer that offered kind of a higher cap on an individual performance bonus because that's something I can control, you know, much more than an entire firm's performance. Now, some of you who are more risk averse, right, and you are thinking, you know what, profit share sounds nice because it's not all on my shoulders. Great, right? Like that's a meaningful difference in terms of the culture of a firm and the types of people that are gravitated towards certain firms that I think it's important for people to realize as they're doing their due diligence and examining these different opportunities. I'm also seeing a lot of other types of non-financial compensation, I'll call them, kind of pop up in the industry this year. So more dinner allowances for staying in the office after 8 p.m. than I've ever seen before, more cell phone and personal technology reimbursements than I've ever seen before. Again, nice perks, appreciated, but much lower at a much lower cost to the firms than raising base salaries. Anything else you want to add to that, Jenny Ray?
No, I think you really covered it. I think the main thing for the firm side is that they're thinking about they've like these firms value people. They value their people. They're valuable inside the organization. They're really working on creating that value. So if you give somebody a cell phone allowance, they can point to the phone and every time they're using the phone, they can remember like the firm paid for this, right? So $1,000 or $2,000, including your plan for the year, it ends up being a very sticky opportunity. So when you're thinking about those kinds of perks that you're offering inside your organization, if you're working as a firm leader, that's really vital. And then the second thing is that still most firms, just in terms of the scope, the amount of firm-based variable comp that you get versus personal variable comp, the personal variable comp eclipses the firm-based variable comp, at least at the levels that really this report covers. And that shift happens more into senior levels. So what's novel about what's happening now is that you're seeing partner style compensation packages move
Move
downward
down.
in the firm, right?
Yeah.
And but they're still not like a partner is going to be 70% at risk. You're going to be like 3% at risk in terms of whether the firm meets performance or not. And so that's where you'll really begin to see those major differences.
If you've already read the report or perused it, one of the things that you would have noticed is that undergrad entry-level compensation is in a much narrower band than entry-level MBA compensation. It's a much broader spectrum of comp that you can expect to earn as an incoming MBA into the industry. And what that tells us is that firms perceive the value of an MBA differently, while there is consensus on the value that early career analysts bring to the table. And so let me just walk you through a couple of these starting salary bands, and then we'll get into the implications. So I think one of the things that's important to know up front is that in consulting, MBA and undergrad analysts primarily do the same work, right? MBAs are valuable, but
Primarily, Naman. Let's just be
yeah,
honest.
primarily. And there's value to having an MBA, but firms don't need a ton of them compared to historical precedent. And so the range, generally speaking, of starting base salaries on the undergrad side, it's about 90K to 110K base salary in the US. On the MBA side, it's 120K to 190K. So you can see a $70,000 spread versus a $20,000 spread. And so this tells us, right, that okay, MBAs are historically twice the cost, right? But at least initially in the first year, don't add twice the value from the perspective of consulting firms because they're doing a lot of the same work as their undergrad counterparts. And in an efficiency oriented environment, this doesn't fly. And I've heard firsthand from leaders at consulting firms this year that their cohort mix is shifting. So they may be hiring the same number of people, but they're hiring less MBAs this year and more undergraduates and specialty master candidates to take their place because of what we've just outlined. And so one of the things that this does, besides for affect maybe the historical relationship that firms have had with their MBA partners is it does increase the need for robust training at firms because the experience level, the age level, right, at consulting firms is skewing younger. And firms that haven't historically invested in executive communication training, in executive presence training, right, and some of those softer skills that MBAs bring to the table at a higher level, we're seeing that they are having to invest now in a different way because the cohort mix, the age mix, the experience mix is shifting at those firms. And so it's not even necessarily that the firms are making a purely financial decision. It's just that some of that spend is being reallocated away from comp to training and professional development. And firms see outsized benefit from this because it increases retention. And so there's a better return that they're seeing from taking this strategy as opposed to what we've seen as being normal in the past. Jenny Ray, anything you want to add to that? I'll give you the floor.
I think two main things. My kids like to remind me that I was, in college in the 1900s. So a few things have changed in the last couple of decades. Number one is that actually the folks coming out of university were really seeing advanced experience on their resumes. So when I graduated, it was like, you don't need to have done anything. They would even tell us, you don't have to practice for case interviews, which was like, quite frankly, complete bollocks even then. But still, the real shift was that when we were off doing, summer camps, the kids now are building businesses in their sophomore year, and they're working for these major national name brands in their junior years. And the emphasis on early career experience is kind of one thing that's not captured on here that I just wanted to add on. So one part of it is that the questionable value add of an MBA is coming into scope, right? Do you even need it in your career? More folks are opting for no. MBAs are widening the band of who they accept. So they have kids that are 22 to 23, as well as people that they're not kids anymore, 35, 36, 37, that are in these MBA programs. But I think the bigger story is that our undergrads are superhuman. These
Yeah.
folks are amazing. But for those of you that are in the career services sector, this is putting an increased burden on training your students to be almost MBA level ready at the undergraduate level. And because firms are asking for this, they're willing to invest internally. Like Naman said, they are bringing training in. They're asking for additional support externally. They're building versus buying, but they're still looking for in the talent war folks to have the significant amount of preparation. We're still seeing that. I would say MBAs add the same amount of value in terms of somebody who was a $50,000 a year, non-business career earner. When it comes to somebody just rising up through the ranks and staying, we're seeing tenures at firms increase as well. So the internal MBA is incredibly real. The on-the-job MBA is incredibly real, and the undergrad MBA is actually also incredibly real.
So, what does this mean for both firms and for candidates? Well, we've seen a lot of consolidation in the industry over the last decade, but there are hundreds of middle market firms that do amazing work, offer, kind of industry standard compensation, that haven't traditionally maybe had a chance at some of this talent at the MBA level, or maybe they haven't been considered as options, by MBA candidates who are looking to break into consulting. And so we're seeing this great almost matchmaking happen for the first time between specialized practice areas, boutique firms, and top talent, where there just hasn't been alignment before. These firms often hire smaller cohorts. They often kind of break out of the traditional recruiting cycles, but they offer amazing opportunities for top candidates. They often offer faster promotion cycles, earlier project ownership. There's more room for negotiation on some of these things as you're in the interview process and the offer process. And so, if I was at a small consulting firm today, I would be paying attention, right, to what's happening in terms of MBA hiring at the larger firms and seeing if there was kind of new talent that was available to me that might not have been available to me 5 years ago. And if I was an MBA candidate, I'd be broadening my scope in terms of the firms that I was targeting, to ensure that I was maximizing my chances of landing an offer that I was really stoked about. So this matching process is taking place, and one of the things that we're doing at Management Consulted is actually playing matchmaker. And so we work with dozens and dozens of these boutique consulting firms who come to us and are like, hey, like we've never had to recruit this kind of talent before. Like, where does this talent live? And the answer is a lot of that talent lives in our community. And so one of the great joys of our team is getting a chance to connect some of the candidates in our community with the amazing firms that we built relationships with. And if you've got questions about how we can help you do that, then just please reach out. We're happy to chat. I know we're getting close to the end of our time today, and I do want to save some time for questions and discussion. I also want to save some time for walking through the numbers specifically. So let's just wrap up with trend number 5. And Jenny Ray, I'll let you speak to this if you'd like. It's just the continued explosion of in-house strategy groups inside the Fortune 500 and how they're a viable alternative to management consulting. One of the things that folks will see in our report is that we include compensation not just from traditional consulting firms, but from the strategy groups at some of these companies that folks see here on the slide.
Yeah. One of our goals this year was to really expand the comp collection inside strategy groups. And I think we're still really honestly at the early stages. Our goal is to help to demystify these alternatives and to create pathways for people who are really looking for this type of work, analytically heavy, project-based, rotational. And these firms offer it in spades. In fact, sometimes they're offering more direct access to senior leadership than you have when you're buffered at a consulting firm as an analyst and you have someone who's senior who's actually managing that relationship. The downside, and there really is only one, is that you have to really like the industry that you're in, because Capital One doesn't do hamburger projects, and JP Morgan doesn't do travel projects, and United Health Group just is focused on healthcare. And so, for folks that want that more kind of rotational experience, not just practically and analytically, but also from an industry perspective, that's a really important note for the benefits of being in direct consulting. That's one of these things that these firms just simply cannot provide. But on all of the other fronts, they've really come up the curve. They've, through hiring consultants externally, have built internal practices, have built internal training processes, have built internal sprints and internal communications training and internal analytical training. And so, especially if you kind of know that you want to land somewhere and stay for a while, these are incredible places to have very varied work, and a really quick actually pathway to P&L leadership inside the organizations as well. So we'll continue to focus on advancing more of the comp studies that we're doing in this space. And if any of you that are listening are from one of these organizations and you want a very, very, kind of popular pathway to candidates to share about what you do and what you offer, we're certainly excited about helping with that.
I always tell people, Jenny Ray, if you know what you want to be when you grow up, these are fantastic opportunities for you. And if you don't know yet, then right, the rotational type of experience that consulting or traditional consulting provides is for you. But we have a lot of candidates in our community that for family reasons, right, or others, that they're just not maybe able to travel as much as a traditional management consultant would. And you have an alternative career path here that can offer you a lot of the same benefits, a lot of the same rigor, with a little bit of a different lifestyle.
Naman, can I just mention one last thing about that, though, that I think is interesting? I do think that the main selling bonus and the reason that comp was lower at many of these firms originally was because consulting was considered to have a low score on lifestyle, right? And now that consulting firms are in office, but they're traveling less. Yeah. They're certainly not demanding as much. They have a lot more visibility into the timing and planning that they have. They're considered to be much better places for women and family members to work, right? Lots of different benefits that are happening. What you're actually seeing is that comp has to come to parity. So a lot of these, we're seeing faster rises in these areas to meet the consulting firms, where before they used to say like trade off lifestyle for comp, and now they're just saying actually they're starting to look a lot more similar in that way as well.
I'd say there's still a delta, but less than there ever has been before.
Absolutely agreed.
For sure. Yeah. So before we open things up for questions, let's just show you some numbers from key firms that I know you all care about. And so what you can see here, if you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or here live with us or video podcast on Spotify, is you can see the numbers for MBB. Here's the high level takeaway, right? Starting salaries froze at both the pre-MBA and the post-MBA entry levels at Bain, BCG, and McKinsey. But the big difference that we saw here is that BCG is actually one of those firms that raised its max performance bonuses, specifically at the MBA level. So this year, if you're an MBA hire at BCG, your max total compensation is potentially higher, even though your base salary is the same as it would have been 2 years ago. Bain still leads the way in terms of max total compensation. These are just very marginal differences, as you can see here on the slide. It's really just signaling more than anything else, not a meaningful difference in terms of total compensation at all. So you can see McKinsey, Bain, BCG. If you've got multiple offers from this group of firms, compensation probably isn't going to be your determining factor when you decide where you're going to want to go. As we look at the big four, one of the things that surprises a lot of people is that in the strategy practices, many of the big four strategy practices aren't far behind MBB when it comes to starting salaries. And specifically, Parthenon inside of EY and Strategy and inside of PwC are on par with MBB. The big kind of dichotomy that you see in the big four is that Deloitte, EY, and PwC have really invested robustly in their strategy practices. KPMG lags a little bit behind in terms of that investment and in terms of that prestige. And so the comp reflects that right now. We're seeing, again, that gap narrow as well, but that's historically been true, at least in terms of the strategy practices inside of the big four. Where are we seeing increased hiring specifically inside of the big four? Government and public sector practices, especially in the Middle East, and then digital practices as well. One of the other things that you'll notice in the report that is a little bit interesting is that the total comp at Deloitte looks lower at the undergraduate level than its big four peers. And that's because at Deloitte, you don't see a performance bonus at the undergrad level until year 3. And so just something to keep in mind as you're doing your due diligence in some of these firms. And if you have a question about why Deloitte does that, we can address that in the Q&A. Last thing I'll just mention here in terms of specific numbers are boutique firms. And the way here at Management Consulted that we define boutique is not a small firm. That's not what we mean when we say boutique. We just mean a firm that has an industry or a functional focus area. And they compete against larger players in that particular domain. That's our definition of boutique. So as you're looking at this slide, you're seeing a lot of massive firms on here, firms that are right 10x the size and the scale of MBB. So to us, boutique doesn't equal small, it means specialized. And so inside of kind of the non-MBB and the non-Big Four consulting firms, we did see some firms that actually raised salaries. And so you're seeing the compensation gap between these firms and MBB narrowing. And some of these firms even offer more total maximum compensation, right? So firms like Alvarez and Marsal, firms like Carney, Alex Partners, you can see Accenture Strategy on here, Oliver Wyman, are all fantastic places to work, are all actively hiring and pay just as much, if not more, than some of the firms that you would maybe consider to be the marketplace leaders in comp, or at least expect to be the market leaders in comp. Again, inside of the full report, you'll get all of this information and more on over 100 firms, base salaries, signing bonus, performance bonus, relocation, retirement benefits, some of the non-financial benefits that we mentioned. All of that's in the report for you. Before we open things up for Q&A, Jenny Ray, let's just quickly talk through hiring cycles, right? I think the key takeaway here is that the hiring cycles for this year are already here, right? Like the prep runways should start for a lot of candidates today, or at least here over the next couple of weeks, right? So if you are an advanced professional degree candidate, a JD, an MD, a PhD, your hiring season starts next month. Right. So a lot of these firms run PhD specific recruiting programs. Application deadlines for those programs are in February. Interviews happen in late Feb, early March, and those programs happen in the spring. And if you are lucky enough to be accepted to one of those programs, you're often also extended an automatic interview invite for a first round full-time interview. And so you really want to take advantage if you're a PhD, JD, or MD of those programs. as we share the recording and the report, we'll share some more information with those of you who registered for this live call in terms of what those programs are and when those deadlines are. If you're an undergraduate or a specialty master's candidate, your recruiting season starts in April, which is crazy because you're going to start recruiting in April for jobs that won't start until summer of 2026. But that's just the nature of the beast when it comes to consulting recruiting. And so that means that if you are right now a second semester sophomore, you need to start thinking about getting ready for interviews that will determine where you intern your junior summer. And if you're a second semester junior, now is the time for you to be preparing for full-time interviews for jobs that will start the summer after you graduate. And so at a lot of our university partners, we are doing spring programming to help prepare these sophomores and juniors for recruiting that's going to happen this summer. So if you're in career services and you feel like, hey, you know what, like our programming doesn't happen till the fall, like we're too late, then get in touch with us and we'll help you come up with a strategy to capture students at the right time in terms of getting them prepared for these opportunities. If you're an incoming first-year MBA, your recruiting starts this summer. A lot of the firms that we've talked about today have dedicated summer programs to kind of expose you to the industry and expose you to job opportunities early. You want to take advantage of those. You'll find more information on the Management Consultant website on those. And then rising second-year MBAs, if you want to re-recruit in the fall, then that re-recruitment season is going to happen in August. And then finally, I know we have a lot of lateral hires, experienced hires in the call. We've talked about today how firms are looking for folks with experience. And primary hiring season for lateral hires happens in the spring. So March to May is when you will find an outsized number of experienced folks landing job offers. And so if you are in industry right now and you want to move into consulting, or if you're at a consulting firm and want to make the jump to a different consulting firm, you should be working on your resume now. You should be starting to prepare for case interviews now. You've got a 6 to 8 week runway to kind of hit that peak season at full speed. If you've got questions about how this applies to you, please shoot us an email. Our email address will be in the chat. It'll be in the show notes if you're listening to this via podcast. Write us and we'll help get you sorted. With that, Jenny Ray, let's move into Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes left in our session. And some folks here actually submitted questions ahead of time. So we want to honor the time that you took to send us questions ahead of time. Japheth was kind enough to kind of pop these here up on this slide, and he even categorized them for us. So Japheth, thank you so much. So let me just walk through these quickly and let's see which ones are worth addressing. We've talked about Big Four consulting entry-level salaries already, so I think that question's been answered. We've talked about what the standard offer is at the MBA level as well. All right, January, how about this? Do you want to address this first and I can add on? How do I negotiate my salary while working at a tier 2 consulting firm with a typical starting base of 150K?
Yeah, the short answer is you don't. The beauty of salary transparency is that it does not leave room for negotiation. They tell you what you're going to earn, which means not just you, but everybody else who you're working with knows what you're going to earn. It's part of building great dynamic teams inside an organization that you're never wondering if that person who's right next to you is making 10 grand more than you. The only thing that you can negotiate for, and if you're an experienced hire, this is always our top advice, is you can adjust for the position. Right. So you can fight for, hey, I really think that I should be classified as a pre-manager level hire, not a MBA hire. So can you move me up one level? That increased level comes with increased compensation. But from a base perspective, the firms are incredibly aligned with where they are across the board at firms like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, actually even across offices. So they don't care about purchasing power. It's just like if you're a McKinsey New York person or a McKinsey, Cincinnati person, right? McKinsey Cleveland is maybe a better example, but like if you're in one of these offices where you have more purchasing power, good for you. right? Big four. So depending on what the classification of tier two is, here, if you're thinking of big four as tier two, they actually do deviate from that. So someone in Cleveland versus New York would get paid differently based on where they are located. So if you want to negotiate, you cannot negotiate for the same office in the same position, but you could change the office and you could change the position in your negotiations if you would like to get more comp.
And if you're one thing I'll add on to that, Jenny Ray, I'm glad you mentioned negotiating for position because that's exactly what I would have advised as well. There is some room for negotiation if you're a lateral hire on variable comp, right? So base salary equals risk for a firm, right? Variable comp, less risk. And so if you're willing to bet on yourself, there's opportunity if you're kind of lateraling over to maybe kind of have some wiggle room on the variable comp side, but not necessarily on the base salary side.
Yeah.
Industry trends, which sector or division within consulting is currently on the rise? We talked about healthcare, we talked about supply chain, we talked about cloud services at the top of the call today. Those are driving outsized demand. There are more, but those are the highest growth potential for the next 12 months. Are there substantial shifts in salary when specializing in a particular consulting discipline? There absolutely are. Generally speaking, strategy practices will see the highest salary because those projects are able to earn the most for the firm. Like they cost the most for a client. And so then that filters down to the consultants who are staffed inside of that practice. Inside of some of these practice areas and sectors that we see as being particularly hot, if you do have some kind of specialized knowledge or background or experience, and you're able to come in at a mid to senior level, that's when you see, right, maybe kind of outsized salary growth like in your career versus someone who'd even be in strategy, right? So if you are coming into a digital practice and you have experience, at OpenAI, or if you've been working on Copilot at Microsoft, and now you're going to come over to a digital practice inside of consulting and bring some of that experience, that perspective, right, to a practice that's rapidly growing. Okay, then you could make more in that particular practice than you could in strategy. But generally speaking, strategy pays the most, and then you go down from there.
Love it.
Yeah, where are consultants leaving to? Right, turnover rate depends on the firm, depends on the geography. There's a lot of variance in terms of turnover rate. But where do consultants go post consulting? Some of them go to get an MBA. A lot of them go own a P&L inside of an organization that was a client of theirs. Right, like oftentimes one of the reasons that you want to go into consulting is to leave it. Right. And so you get the training, you get the rotational experience, you get the branding, you get the network, and then you leave, right? You leave because you want ownership, right? As an advisor, you have a lot of influence, but no formal authority. That's not for everybody, and it's not for everybody for an extended period of time. And so you leave to go work inside of a big corporate. Some might go to private equity. The pipeline from consulting to investment banking, not super large. That's not a common exit opportunity, right? Like there are kind of two divergent career paths. It happens, but it's not common.
I can just say one more thing about
Yeah.
this. We haven't collected the formal data on turnover by firm. Firms keep it. It's usually pretty close to the best. But anecdotally, it's the tenure per firm is lengthening, which contributes to, in a small way, it's not the number one thing, but it contributes to this flat salary phenomenon that we're seeing, right? If they're able to keep people and there are fewer spots opening up and a lower demand, because like before at Bain, we would have to hire based on X% of attrition. When that X% goes down by 5% or 10% or 20%, we actually have to hire fewer people at the base level in order to maintain them through more senior levels as well. So I think it's just important to note that that we are certainly anecdotally seeing the tenure at firms extend, and the project duration at firms extend as well. So your likelihood of having, like I had 11 projects in 2.5 years, that would be a phenomenon today. It's more likely that you'll have 5 in 2.5 years. And so a lot of people stick around because they want to get more of the well-rounded experience that they came for in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, someone asks, with the MBA hiring trending downwards, do you also expect advanced degree candidate hiring to trend lower as well? Not as much, right? There's two reasons for that. Number one, firms really value diversity of background. And so you don't want six engineers on a team. You don't want six MBAs on a team, right? You want the perspective and the skill set that PhDs, JDs, and MDs bring to the table. That's number one. Number two, there are some firms that actually pay their advanced degree candidates a little bit less than MBAs. And so that's not true for every firm, but some firms, right, see some cost savings, if you will, as well as that diversity of background, thought, and perspective by hiring more advanced degree candidates and less MBA candidates. And then the last question that came in was, what will the job market be in 10 years? And my answer to that is, if I knew, I'd have a lot more money than I do right now. And I would probably not be here. I'd be making some moves, right, to take advantage of what would be happening in the next 10 years. So we have some hot takes and predictions that maybe we can share on a different episode, Jenny Ray, about what the next decade's going to hold. But obviously, no one knows.
No one knows specifically, but let's just say one thing. We expect that the consulting revenues will increase for the next 10 years. We don't see any reason why they won't, because consulting thrives in uncertainty and uncertainty is increasing. We also expect that we will see who is getting hired and the rates that they're getting hired and what you're expected to do to change. It's changed in the last decade. It will change again in the next 10 years. So the expectations will increase. Your technological expertise will need to increase. But fundamentally, critical thinkers and great communicators will always be in high demand in this space. So what the numbers will be and where the big pockets of wins will be, we cannot go into that for sure, but we have a significant amount of confidence in the durability of this industry, despite what the news would love to make you think.
And we really broke that down in detail inside the report. We had more time and space there to talk about our rationale for why that's the case than we do today. And so download the report. It's 100% free. All of our analysis is in there as well to kind of walk you through why what's happening in the industry is happening and then what we expect to see over the next 1, 3, 5, and 10 years. With that being said, we're at the top of the hour. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today for this conversation on consulting salaries and what they mean for you. If you've got follow-up questions, please feel free to write us. Our email address is in the chat. It's in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And happy Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us today.